friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today for another frequently asked question, and this one is in regards to making wines and meads. Now, this isn't going to be about how to make wine and mead, so make sure if you're interested in the whole process, I have a rather in-depth playlist that I'll be putting in the description box down below, as well as the link to the playlist on all the frequently asked questions I get so far. I'm always making new videos like this. Now, this one is about when is the best time for me to rack my wine or my mead. And if you're new to this process, you're probably wondering what that even means. Well, basically what that means is you're going to strain or filter out any sediments, any bits and pieces, like when you're infusing a mead like I'm doing here. I have cinnamon sticks and cloves and pieces of oranges in here, including the skins as well. And so I'm going to obviously want to strain all this out when I'm done with it. So I'm infusing the flavors into the mead as it's making. So that's what I mean there. This one here is a wine. This is made from the last bit of grape juice from our own grapes that I didn't get used up, but wasn't enough to make a full gallon of wine. So I had 2 quarts left. I pull out of the freezer, and then I added some of this organic tropical passion fruit juice that I've been getting from Vitacost. This is really good stuff. So that should make a pretty interesting flavor, because this tastes really good. And that way I was able to get a full gallon by doing that. So I have 2 meads and a wine, and this one is raspberry, using freeze-dried raspberries. You can also use fresh, but you can learn all about that in my video that's just on mead making. So the difference is mead is made with honey and water and whatever starter you're going to use, and adding any kind of fruit or herb or whatever to add to the flavor is entirely optional. Whereas wine is made from juice with added sugar. Even though there's a lot of sugar in juice, you're not going to get a very strong wine unless you add sugar to the juice. So just remember, when you're fermenting process works through most of the sugars. So that brings me now to the talking about when is the best time to rack it. Well, it's all going to be up to you, based on your tastes, based on your needs, based on how you plan on using your wines and your meads. So I have a video that's also in that playlist I'll be putting down below, that's all about all the many ways you can use homemade wines. Even if you don't drink, you can still make wine to use it in many other ways. That includes making medicinal extracts, flavored extracts, marinating, and so much more. So make sure you check out that video to find out the many uses, on top of the fact that winemaking is just a good skill to have. It's really not that hard, but it can take a little practice knowing how it should look, how it should taste, and all that. So when you rack it, and by the way, I didn't finish saying what else racking is. It's not just straining it out. It's also then once you strain it out and put it back in your bottle, you're gonna take your airlock off and put a tight fitting cap and let the sediments settle down to the bottom. You can see some sediments here, and if you're doing something like this where you actually have fruit pieces in there, you're going to have a lot more sediment than possibly something like this where it's just juice. So, but you're still going to get what they call dregs, and dregs can often have a bitter flavor to them, and so it's a good idea to get that out of there. Plus, it's going to help, the more times you rack it, the more clear of a wine you're going to get. Some will never get completely clear. It just depends on what it's made out of. Oftentimes, meads tend to be cloudier. So racking is that process after you strain that out, and you let it sit, where you siphon the liquid off the top so that you're not getting the sediments in there. And I do have a video showing how I do that, and that's, I believe, part 4 in the winemaking series. So how do you know when? Well, the typical ferment time for wine is very similar to vinegar. It's going to be 30 days. But again, it's just like anything else that's living. You're going to have different time frames, and that's going to be dependent on many different factors, as well as the bacteria and yeast that are working away in there, because they're living things. You just think about it. When a woman is with child, 9 months is a standard time frame, but that child could come at 8.5 months or 9.5 months and be just as healthy as a child born at right at 9 months. And so that same thing applies to your wine and your mead. So if it's been going for 30 days and it's still very active and bubbly like I've got going on here, this one is my newest one, so it's very active. It's only been going for a few days, so the bubbles are going through here, the airlock, a lot quicker than they are here, because these ones I think are about 3 weeks old. I don't even keep track of the time anymore. I used to write it on my calendar when I started it, which is a good idea when you first start making these, so you know when to check it, especially if you're going to have these up and out of sight and not on your counter like I tend to do a lot of mine these days, where you can daily, you're walking by and you're seeing the activity going on here. So when you get to that 30 days and you still see it's very active, then what you need to do is decide, well, do you want it to be done? Do you want it to be stronger? So what I recommend is then, and you can do this at the 3-week mark too, because if you're wanting a wine, maybe you're wanting it to have a sweeter flavor or have more fizz to it, you may want to stop the process early anyway. That's also going to reduce the amount of alcohol in the wine. So if you're looking at, using it for maybe having a wine with dinner or after dinner, then that's going to be dependent on your taste and what you want. And if you want a lower alcohol content in it anyway, stopping the process early while there's still some sugars in there will lend to it a little more sweetness, more fizziness, as well as less alcohol content. If you're wanting a stronger alcohol content, you're going to want it to completely finish bubbling before you rack it. But you can test it through the process at any time. It's not going to hurt it to do that. Obviously, you don't want to do it too often, but it's still a good idea. Maybe at about the 3-week mark, if you're thinking of having it for the sake of flavor, go ahead and test it at that time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to test the flavor of this one right here. So since I've got a lot of pieces in here, I want to make sure that I have something to strain this out with, because I don't want this in here. So I'm just going to pour a little bit, straining it through my little mesh strainer there, into here, and I'm going to show you 2 different things that you can do to find out if indeed this is where you want this. So one of the things obviously will be to taste it. So let's see what the flavor tastes like of this is orange spice, by the way. Okay, that's pretty good. I can taste the orange, I can taste the cloves, I can taste the cinnamon. Actually has a pretty strong flavor. It's still fizzy, but not super sweet. So I can actually stop the process of this right now because it's pretty good as it is, unless I'm wanting it to finish out so I can have a stronger alcohol content to use for other things. So I think I'll probably be racking this one soon. Putting this airlock back on here for now, because we do want to try to limit the exposure of oxygen in there as much as possible. So you're going to have your little flask here, and I show this in part 1, my new part 1 of my winemaking series. You're going to put some of that wine in there. I never can remember how far up to fill it. And then what you're going to have is your hydrometer, and this is going to measure the alcohol content. You just want to make sure there's enough alcohol in there that this thing can float. Let me add a little bit more without overflowing it. And then once you got it in there, you're going to spin it. I'm suspecting the alcohol content is actually pretty low. Now, this isn't going to do you any good unless you've measured it before you started. And so I didn't do that because I don't really measure it every time. I get about a 10 to 15% alcohol content in my wines and meads just from experience, and I can usually tell by the taste and the flavor. Because it's floating quite a bit, it's going to be a pretty low content. And I'm looking at probably about 5% in this one. Well, low for what this is. So again, you want to measure it first after you've got all your sugar in there and before you add your starter and get it going. And that will tell you where to start with. And it should be floating pretty high up when the sugar's in there. As the alcohol level increases, this thing will sink down until it might be floating at around 0. So if you started at 10% or 15% and it's at 0, that means when you're done, that means you've got a 10 or 15%, depending on where you started. Again, I didn't measure it, so it might be about 15% that I started off with, and it's floating at 5%. So that tells me I could even have as high as a 10% alcohol ratio. It tastes to me like it's somewhere between that 5 and 10% amount. So if you're wanting to let it ferment longer, you can simply pour what's in the flask back in there and in your measuring cup. I'm not going to add those little pieces that came out, no need for that. And I might just let this go ahead and ferment for a couple days before I deal with it. Now, same thing is going to apply to the raspberry. I'll go through the same process. I'm going to strain it out and taste it and see what I think of that. Now, again, this one's going to have, it's only been going for a few days, so I'm not going to bother tasting it for about another 2.5 weeks. So you can do that a couple of different times with both the measurement of the alcohol content as well as the taste. Just to get an idea. And again, if you're wanting to use it for making extracts, especially medicinal extracts, I do recommend allowing it to completely finish to get a good strong alcohol content, because that's going to work better at pulling the medicinal properties out of your herbs. Now, when it comes to making an extract for flavor, that's not as necessary. So if you like the flavor of this, let's say I want to make a raspberry extract, and I can start off with a raspberry mead. I don't have to have this completely finished anyway. Or if I like the vanilla mead that I made, that's another good one for making a vanilla extract or any other kind of extract, because that vanilla is going to add a little flavor to that. Now, I've had some that turned out, like I did a mango pineapple one that I let finish all the way. Flavor didn't end up good, but the alcohol content was pretty strong. That one right there is a really good one for making medicinal extracts and for marinating. I use it for sauteing and adding to Italian sauces and whatnot, even putting in my pasta water when I'm cooking the pastas to add a little flavor to that. So again, I recommend you check out the videos in that playlist I'll put down below, especially the one on the many ways to use it, because that's going to help you determine where you want to stop the process. So by the way, in between, as you're letting it sit, if you want to rack it maybe 2, 3, 4 times, make sure you have a tight fitting cap on here. Remove the airlock, because you've wanted to stop the process. You don't want it to continue. So keep a tight fitting cap on there and until you're done racking it, and then you can bottle it up however you want. I usually anymore just put them back in the jugs like this, but sometimes I will also bottle them using some recycled, cleaned out avocado oil bottles, because those are dark. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful. And again, even if you don't drink, I still recommend working on this process, because you can find many uses for this, even if it's just for the sake of barter. Okay, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.